We'll start with the traditional yoga props that we use inside of studios that will support your practice, but please know that you don't need anything fancy, and I'm going to show you ways that you can modify these props if you don't have access to purchasing, or if you don't have any of these at home already. So starting with a yoga strap. This is an awesome ally to have that we'll be using throughout practices in different postures, or shapes as we call them in Dao Yin. This can be modified and substituted with a scarf. So you can just grab your favorite scarf, something that I would say has a good amount of length to it, but this is a great way to modify an actual yoga strap. Next we have yoga blocks. Now I'm not going to lie, out of all of the props, I think that these are probably the most difficult to mimic with something at home. But it's totally possible. The reason why I say that is because yoga blocks have the option to sit at different sizes, different heights, and that actually makes a difference during different postures or shapes that we'll be in. So I do suggest, if there are any purchases that you make along with this course and these practices, is that you get yoga blocks. These not only help with stabilization, but again, you'll have the option to modify the sizes and the height. The modification that I'm going to suggest, if you don't have blocks or don't have access to them, are just large books. Now, the larger the better, the thicker the better. If you have a couple of books that can stack, and maybe you can, tie them up so that they don't slip and slide, that could be a nice option as well. You can just play along with that, with what you have at home, anything else that you see that might mimic this shape and be supportive, where when you put weight on it, it won't sink or break, of course. Next we have just traditional yoga blankets. Now these can be modified very easily at home, probably the most easily modified with home objects like a towel, a larger towel. You could use a small to medium-sized blanket. I wouldn't necessarily recommend using anything like a comforter, because they're really thick and probably hard to work with and fold up in ways that we use them during this practice. And then finally, we have a yoga bolster. This might be the second in line that I would say might be the hardest to mimic, but totally doable. This is a standard yoga bolster. It's smaller than some of the others. Some of them can be wider and taller. To mimic a bolster, one thing you can do is you can use a bed pillow. I don't necessarily recommend that as the first go-to, because most bed pillows, the shape of them are fairly wide. I actually recommend using more of like an accent pillow that's a little bit more narrow, like this. I happen to have a set of them, so if I was to modify these pillows into a bolster, I might take a towel or a blanket. Here I'm going to take a blanket, and just in a fairly simple, quick way, roll this up so that the pillows are snug together in the blanket, and this can be used as a prop. If we're using the bolster for a couple of different shapes or postures, it could be tricky with the homemade version to switch and move things to a different side without it completely coming apart. So my suggestion would be, if you're going to modify with home props, that in the bolster sense, if you're wrapping it in a blanket, if there's a way that you can do it so that it's super snug and it doesn't fall apart, that might be better, so that you don't have to come out of your practice and work on logistics of your props. I do really actually recommend that a bolster just be part of your practice, mainly because they're firm, they won't sink too much anyway when you place body weight on them. They're soft, they absorb your body's shape and also support it. So these are the props that we'll be using in our practices throughout the year. And I'll share with you before each practice which props we'll be using so that you can have them ready to go for your ritual.